Hello everybody, I took a little time setting this camera, speaking a little loud. I practiced things which I was told by my viewers. Here I am again back to share things about the history of literature. The first thing that I am talking about today, or rather we are talking about today, is the age of Chaucer. So who was Chaucer? Chaucer was a 14th century man, and obviously the 14th century had its impact on him. He learned his lessons from the 14th century. Now, what was the 14th century like? It was full of fun and frolic and a lot of time for people. So what was the favorite activity of the people in the 14th century for their pastime? It was not TV, it was not radio, it was not fun like us. It was fun in their own sense. So pilgrimage was the way out for them. They liked to go to pilgrimages. And one important place that probably every 14th century man in England would like to go to was Canterbury, because there they had something called the Cathedral of St. Thomas a Becket. And St. Thomas a Becket was famous because he had sacrificed himself in the name of God. He had not bowed down to the will of the king and had stood for the church. So standing for a god in the medieval age is a big thing to do, so he became famous. Now everybody went to Thomas a Becket's shrine. But the fact to be noticed about Chaucer's writing in the Canterbury Tales, and the very lucid and very clear fact probably, is that every character that he is described about in the Canterbury Tales is not as pious as every 14th century man would be. So how does this variation come? Where from this difference comes? So this comes from the same human emotion. The ideas of greed, the ideas of lust, the ideas of kind of a vulgarity, something which is not expected to be in a good human being, especially a church going human being. So church had certain high morals attached to it, and there was a need of understanding this, but the 14th century public failed, and Chaucer was too wise to notice it. Now again, we must notice as readers that Chaucer's texts are not entirely harsh satires of the society in the sense that Langland's are, or probably later on Swift's are. So Chaucer is basically enjoying describing the society and at the same time showing it very lifelike. Okay, so here we meet that kind of literature where description of life matters the most. Now description could mean a lot of things, and I may be put guilty to be confusing you, but that's not my point here. When we are describing things, we have a certain point of view, alright? So if we are just putting things as they are, that is the very basic kind of description, where we don't have any hidden ideas or motives or double meanings, double entendres, all the complicated kind of things that literature becomes probably in the 19th, not in the 19th, but in the 20th century. Alright, when everything becomes a symbol, as the school is called. Now why I am doing this again is to contrast literature. There was a very famous critic, which he stands as a very famous critic, T.S. Eliot, till date. His idea is that there are two tools to understanding literature: comparison and analysis. This was told to me by my professor and it drops to my mind now, so I can share it with you. Comparison and analysis. So here the first tool I'm using is comparison. Chaucer was very fond of describing as he saw it. So we have the portrait of the lady that famous lady of the bath who is a cloth weaver, and she is very frank about things. Now, what is so hard hitting about that woman? For a woman to have 5 husbands, as the text says, for her is something scandalous in Chaucer's era. Now, do we sense here that same thing I talked about a little earlier? That literature is striking because it talks of the society or shocks the society. Okay? So, either it makes us believe in what we are already believing, or it shocks our thoughts to an extent that everything that we see becomes unbelievable. Now, the former kind, where literature follows life, is that of the 14th century, of the 19th century, the Romantic Age. That was revolution in a political versus romance sense, but at the same time it was also following nature to an extent. Now, in the 20th century, the big turn happened. The crisis happened, where nobody was ready to believe anything. Okay? So, again, that idea is justified, that literature doesn't stay stable. It changes according to the moods of groups of people. So, we have to take that into note. There are around lots of devices that are used in literature. Now, the device that was used in Middle English literature, for that matter, in Chaucer's time in the 14th century, was alliteration. Alliteration was used so much that people began to believe that English was a language of jingling words, rhymes. These were the kinds of expressions that were used. So, at that time, English was not taken that seriously before Chaucer, because Greek was the language, Roman was the language, Latin was the language, the learned languages, more so Latin and Greek. The clergy learnt in Greek, in Roman, and I apologize, actually Latin. So the trouble was that the common masses didn't have any language to unite themselves in. Chaucer was probably the first to give literature of England its own language. That's why he's called the father of English literature. Okay. Now, not that Chaucer wrote only the Canterbury Tales. He wrote other works as well, but they are of lesser importance. That is why in a short span of time, I'm giving them lesser attention. You would get to Merry Wives of Windsor and things like that. But they are not of my prime focus here. Now, coming back to another important writer in that same age is Langland. Langland was more harsh than Chaucer. He was aware of the society, and he was not as ready as Chaucer to let things go as they were. Okay? So he was very harsh, describing the system of selling of pardons, as it was called. Now, why this term selling of pardons? Pardon seems to be a very charitable word. People are asked to be pardoning. Then why selling of pardons? To make it understood very simply, the idea was that these writers knew that the Roman Church had fallen into wrong ways of human life. They did not practice what they preached. They had begun misusing their power, and these pardoners had become that route between God and man where they could exploit man. Okay? And this idea that Catholicism had a certain rottenness within itself, which was obviously not pure Catholicism as written in the book, but manipulated by people. So, no religion is bad. It's the people who make it bad. It's the people who make it look ugly. Then Protestantism developed. That was another story, how Protestantism developed and it changed the scene of England. Alright, and that Catholic Protestant mess that happens, Queen Mary and Elizabeth. See, why I keep hinting at the events that probably would have happened some years earlier or later, is to keep that chronology in a floating manner. We cannot expect, as I said, for literature to be frigid. It never is. Okay? The more you read it in connections, the more you understand it. I have done it that way. That's my way. And I guess it's one of the working ways. Now, coming back to another important figure that comes to my mind. I may go random over ages. If you have doubts in between, you can always directly put in the comment section. I'll be very happy to address your issues. Coming to another vital figure, that of Philip Sidney. Philip Sidney was the first man to describe what the Renaissance man meant. He himself was a very learned man. He lost his life in war, and he understood life as it should be. So this kind of a thing was not done before him. He was the most learned man of his time, probably. And to be that took a lot of effort. So Philip Sidney wrote his Arcadia. Okay, that book was about how beautiful England could have been. Arcadia is a utopia. Alright? Arcadia is a utopia. People believe that Philip Sidney's Arcadia was probably a picture of Queen Elizabeth's England that England could never become. Alright. Again, here a contradiction. Some people may feel that Victoria's England later on was some kind of a perfection of English civilization. Another trick. It's very important to keep the political history of a country in rhythm with the literature that you read, because you'll find at many places these ages are named after these kings. There is the Jacobean age, there is the Elizabethan age. So there was something which was obviously given by these rulers to the age. Okay. In the Elizabethan age, the Protestants were important. Queen Mary was beheaded. Okay. So there was something obviously wrong going on there. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that no strife happens in isolation. There is a negative opposite force working. Okay. So there have been stories that there was a plot against Queen Elizabeth, and Mary Queen of Scots was plotting to kill her. But that's one thing. That ended up with the ruler winning, as it always happens. And we find Spenser writing the Fairy Queen. Spenser wrote the Fairy Queen, and Fairy Queen was about how a knight should be. Alright. The knight should be chivalrous, he should be loving, he should be respecting to the woman, he should do all the good deeds possible in the world. Okay, he should not be lusty, and all the good things possible, and not, all no bad things. So the ideal, the knight. Even now, knighthood is conferred in England. Okay, so the idea has remained the same. Chivalry in the modern sense means a little different, but for the Elizabethans it was different. Now we come to another ethos of the Elizabethan age, that is war. Alright. Now these knights were considered to be very strong warriors. Philip Sidney himself was killed in a war at Spain. No, I'm sorry, not at Spain. He was killed at Greece, fighting for the Greeks. And this was something which was probably not expected from a poet or a nobleman of his class. But then why did he do so? Because he was a man of passion. Okay. Now this being of a man of passion is something so common in the Renaissance age that you can't get away from it. Okay. To explain this man of passion, I would like to refer to two plays, alright, both from Christopher Marlowe. The first play was Timberlane. In Timberlane, the main character Timberlane that he describes is a hero who is not fearful of anything. He's bold, he's chivalrous, he's angry, he chooses his woman as he likes. He uses the word conquers 100 times. So the sense of conquering is the idea that every Renaissance man, the overreacher, believed in. What makes them the overreachers? Because they want to do something new, something experimental, something that no one has ever done before, to grab power. Now this brings me to the second example, Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus is a character who believes that whatever happened before is not to be trusted. God is not to be trusted. Not because he has any visible proofs, but because he will trust anything which is visible. Alright? Not that he has visibility of a demon, or whether a guarantee that the demon will be good or bad to him. He believes in a demon because he can see apparitions of that. He cannot see apparitions of God before his bad time comes, and the Renaissance man is a believer in what he sees. Now this may backfire, and so it does in case of Dr. Faustus. If we analyze that play closely, what do we find? We find it is the journey of an overreacher. My professor used the example of a hero called Neander in Greek, in Greek legends, who wanted to cross the sun and failed. Okay, his ambition was to cross the sun and probably, capture it or something. In Indian legend, we have Ganesha at a point in his history trying to eat up. Not Ganesha. Actually, Hanuman trying to eat up the sun. So that idea of conquering has been universal. Now again I come back to that same point of the universality of literature. Has been universal. So what do we find? Every overreacher has failed. Even God has. Even Hanuman has. So who was Dr. Faustus? Dr. Faustus was a mere man. He had to fail, right? Don't you feel it was justified? Oh well, how does Renaissance care about justification? No, Marlowe's purpose in writing that play was not justifying the death of Dr. Faustus, but to show that an overreacher will most probably have a very bad end. He will end up unblessed, disregarded from heaven, thrown away, discarded. That's the death. Dr. Faustus dies. He calls for Helen, before his death. The calling of Helen is a very important scene because that shows his absolute immersion into sin. When you call a spirit to be one with yourself, theologically you are absolutely not only refusing God but insulting the life that God Almighty has given you. Alright? It's a Christian sin. And probably Marlowe was hinting at his own kind of revolt against God. It is a known fact that Marlowe was but certifiably to be, to be excommunicated from the church for the deeds that he had done. And in those times they had very strict rules of immolution, that is burning of the body alive. So why do it impromptu again? Is to simply, mix match ideas. We have read those fixed history of literature books where the first thing comes after the second after the first. That kind of an order logical thing. I don't want to do that. Okay, even my counting breaks orders. That's because I want you also to break orders. Okay. Now coming back to not back to, actually forward to. Let's go to Eliot. Okay, let's realize what Eliot did to literature. He made a change, big change. He made modernism come into literature. What does modernism mean? For that matter, look at this. What does this glass look like? Oh, cannot tell at once, right? It looks like 5 things at once, right? 5 things at once. So no single meaning possible. This is modernism. Man is so chaotic in the 20th century that no single meaning possible. You can't have it, simply can't have it, because you have so many thoughts in the mind that you will always find yourself chaotic. The best example to understand modernism from the point of view of literature is Wasteland, the Wasteland. The very title signifies that life itself has become a wasteland by the time Eliot is writing. Nobody believes in anything, not in God, not in faith relationships, nothing. No family, nothing. What are people doing? What are people doing in the 20th and 21st century? Even the 21st century. They're going to wars, diplomatic missions, secret missions. For what? Killing human beings? Or spying over them? Getting people killed? Gasified? What? Deaths? Destruction, disaster. That was modernism. How wrong was it for these writers to perceive that modernism meant a broken image, something which cannot be stabilized? How wrong was it to use that staccato rhythm that modernism is often talked of? Staccato rhythm, cut, cut, cut. No similarity. Here again, I did cut, 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 but that's not what staccato rhythm is. It may be like something, just anything, madness. This idea of madness became so famous in 2 ages. Eliot's age and one before that, the Jacobean age, quite before that, before the Elizabethan age. Again, the trouble was the same. For that time, a small political trouble in the Jacobean age became an issue, and madness became a very popular theme because people were confiscated, people were not allowed to move. Same in Eliot's age. People were not allowed to move, they were gasified. They were, women were forced to have unwanted sex. That's what Eliot is writing throughout all his poems. Eliot is writing about suppression, he is writing about sadness, he is writing about unwanted physical relationships that people would never want to be in. He writes about a typist, a very famous typist in the Wasteland, where she goes into the room, she has a man around, she probably feels for a second that he was the same man she loved, but where is love? Nowhere to be found. It's only physical. And physical in the most brutal sense. Even physicality for a second could have tenderness in it, but there is no tenderness. It's come, eat, go. That's all. That's all the Wasteland is about. Now, the most important part of that beautiful poem that I don't want to miss here is the ending section, the solution that Eliot gives in the Wasteland. He says that he comes back to India, we proud Indians, to suggest that there is a solution, and the solution is in Brahma. No, probably my biased Indianhood came in between. No, he gives other examples as well. He gives examples of Christianity. He says that there is a possibility of finding that holy water once we actually feel devoted to that. Alright? So Brahma's word, Om, is the word which means absolute peace. This is what Eliot is focusing in the Wasteland. Are we even now able to achieve it? Can we do it? Or are we still in the wasteland? This is a contemporary question that we should all ask ourselves to understand how far we are postmodern or modern. These questions, The trouble with these questions is that in our theory classes we try to attend these questions in the way these writers have told us, or a Peter Barry has told us, or somebody else has told us. Modernism means you'll find this characteristic, that characteristic. No, there is a way of understanding those characteristics. There is a reason why those characteristics have been attributed to those texts. Your task and my task together with you is to find those clues in those texts, which will be beginning very soon. We'll take up text by text and we'll be analyzing every important part of it. Alright, so that's to be done a little later once we are done with an overview. That's why I'm doing a brush up of things around. Now, by the end of this video, I would like to have an idea of some important terms that are used in literature. Terms in the sense of literary terms. Okay, so what is a simile? A simile is something which compares two things with use of two words, like or as, but that's the very primitive definition of a simile. A simile may also have something which is a direct comparison. Alright, direct comparison in the sense that we are not going for a very deep comparison. Alright, not to confuse you, but we most of the times find an as or like, but sometimes may not find it as well. English is a tricky language. Now, metaphor is a direct comparison in the sense that the quality of an object is compared to the other one. Okay, a lion in the war. So there is no true lion. There's a lion in the war. So a man is acting like a lion. Okay. Now this very famous another device called Metonym. Metonymy means one aspect of an object or a thing has a resemblance to so many things. So what these clever writers, all these good writers have done is that they have taken that one aspect of an object and used that to reflect hundreds of meanings. Alright? So all those meanings that are signified by that one object or that one property of the object are invoked by the use of that word. Here is how metonymy is used. Antonyms, synonyms, I don't think they are very, unknown to people for standards of a bachelor or master's. They are simply opposite words or similar words. Okay, similar meaning words. Phonemes. Now, phonemes are sound words. We have certain sounds, b, like these. Okay, so these sounds are not exactly letters, they are sounds, and they have a certain limitation. They can't go on forever. So there's a certain way of pronouncing it. When we go to probably our second year of literature, I guess, then we are taught how English language is written. Okay, so there's a system about it. It's called the Unstressed system, where every syllable in common speech is divided, most of it is divided into two, which is the first one is unstressed and the other is stressed. Okay, that's how proper English is spoken. We Indians are not very fond of it because we're not doing it the British way. That's okay. That brings me to another topic. That's how my head keeps working. Sometimes I wonder how to title my videos because I mix up a lot of things, but in the end I may even call it a mashup. Next thing what to share with you is the very interesting, the dream sequence in Justice writing, in Langland's writing. Dreams were a very important part of medieval literature. These authors believed that they could see divinity in dreams. They could see life-changing experiences in dreams. During the times of bed, okay, in the earlier century, we understand that medievalism had not yet come, but God had come, okay, and God came in dreams. So this idea of dream narratives was there in medieval literature, where every writer of importance for that matter, used this dream sequence. Langland used it beautifully where all the narration, for an example, you could read up the preface of Langland, all the narration happens in a dream. Okay, where Langland is describing a summer morning and he feels drowsy on a grass plot and then begins dreaming. Okay, that's how it goes. Dreams happen, and dreams happen for good. That for now is sufficient, I guess, for medieval literature. Am I missing something? Give me a second. A summarization at the end. Medieval English literature is something where we first find that the Anglo-Saxon kind of literature or the Old English literature has vanished, and we have come to realize what is called the East Midland dialect, where what came to be later known as English, spoken English, East Midland dialect, from the region where Chaucer belonged to. Okay, it was somewhere near, I guess, the southwest of England. If I'm wrong, do correct me in my comments. Okay. And the next thing to share about medieval literature would be, there was a lot of belief. Okay, and this belief was soon to be shocked. Okay. Now, this shock would produce a lot of changes. What changes? Well, clashes. We'll share that later on, what kind of clashes, what happens, why clashes happen, what thoughts came in, from where the thoughts were coming, a lot of things. For now, it's goodbye, sayonara, love you people, bye.